Welcome to this March 22nd edition of the Courier Paperboyz. I'm sports editor Doug Newhoff, and we've got our March Madness lineup here this morning of Jim Sullivan, Jim Nelson, and Nick Pateros. I guess there's no better place to start, guys, than at the end, so to speak. I don't know what else could be said about UNI's tournament thrill ride, but wow, talk about the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Sully, take us through your weekend.
Well, that about sums it up. It was an incredible weekend. You could cover college basketball for 50 years, 75 years, a century, and not see anything quite like that combination of a buzzer beater half-court shot to beat a Power 5 school, and then have the game essentially won with 44 seconds to go, and then lose in double overtime. Either one of those things doesn't happen very often as it is. Then you put both of them together, and you've got something extraordinary. In fact, getting to the end, the UNI game against A&M, that was, statistically speaking at least, the worst collapse, not just in the history of the tournament, but in the history of college basketball, statistically speaking. Now, you can make an argument that there have been some that have been more historically significant, but just by the numbers it was. And, your heart ached for those kids. They played so well and done so much and done all the right things and then played great basketball for 39 minutes and 16 seconds, and then all of a sudden, the wheels came off. And it was tough. It was tough, but to their credit, they got through it. Jacobson handled it well, the players handled it well, and that's that.
Yeah, and in our jobs as sports writers and journalists, I mean, we're kind of detached from the emotional part of it for the most part, but I mean, you just couldn't help but feel bad for those UNI kids for as well as they played, and they had it. I mean, they were on their way to the Sweet 16, and it was just such a combination of the perfect storm, I guess, so to speak. Bad decisions where the ball went to, bad decisions trying to throw it off people, and they couldn't get a whistle. I mean, frankly, there was Texas A&M did a great job of not fouling in most of those situations, but there was one or two opportunities there where they bodied a UNI guy almost out of bounds, or took a whack at Washburn when he had the ball, and there was an opportunity there to blow the whistle once, or they don't call the foul on Jesperson when the Texas A&M guy drove to the basket. I mean, he's backing away, trying to get out of the way. Probably shouldn't have blown that whistle. I mean, there were just so many things that would have changed the outcome of that game, and I just felt like somebody needed to step in, maybe it's divine intervention, and make sure that the team that deserved to win won.
Well, the amazing thing about it too, Doug, was that UNI had the lead 3 different times in overtime, the first overtime. And to A&M's credit, they made some shots to send it in double overtime where they took over. And to give them some more credit at the end, they hit some layups, they had some easy shots, but we've seen people blow easy shots in that situation before. So they deserve credit for that. The foul call on Jesperson was atrocious. I saw it again in replay. It was a phantom, at best, a phantom call. But going back to what you're saying, you felt so bad for the kids, going back to Friday night, when that shot hit, Jesperson shot hit, and there's the picture I think we ran in our paper of him with his arms spread. You could see behind him these media people, some of whom have no attachment to UNI whatsoever. Barry Tremble from the Daily Oklahoma veteran column, he's standing up and yelling. It was one of those moments where it's such a shock that you can't help but react, and it was extraordinary to be a part of that as well.
One thing I will say that UNI's coaching staff has an opportunity to put together a tremendous recruiting video. If they just show the highlights from their last 3 games and that post-game press conference, I mean, what kid in America wouldn't want to come play for that program?
Oh, no question. Even go back farther than that. I mean, the whole Valley tournament where those games are tied, and those kids did a great job every step of the way in winning those games. The Evansville game at the end of the regular season, even that, there's even in defeat, I think there was something to be gained for UNI by the way the players and coaches conducted themselves, and I think we've seen that in the reaction to what they did.
The downside of it is that the 3 seniors have to leave their college careers that way, and I was talking with my daughter the other night, and she pointed that out. She says, I'll never forget my last college softball game, and Pete probably is the same way with college baseball.
Yes.
And so these kids, I mean, it's always going to be a big part of their future, and they're always going to think about that game that got away, and it's too bad they have to take that with them, because there's so much good in what they did for the program and for themselves.
And I was thinking about this too, from a national standpoint, for people who aren't close to the program, what will be remembered about, maybe not, this team in specific, but the program was Friday night, Sunday night. Whereas those of us in the Cedar Valley, those who are closer to the program, in the state of Iowa in general, we'll remember, I think, it in entirety, the season in entirety, what they did to come back, some of the things that the players did, the way they conducted themselves. It'll be more of an accurate historical package of what it was, but certainly that end will be a part of it.
Yep, it was an interesting tournament for the Panthers, no doubt. You'd have to say that Iowa kind of went out like a lamb. You know, once Villanova got that lead up to double digits in that game, it was, you could kind of see the air go out of the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot that's being made out of the taking Clemens out with the 2 fouls and not putting him back in, and by the time that they got him back in, you know, it was already a blowout. But you needed a perimeter defender there, and it just seemed like they didn't have any fight in them there that first half, and it just snowballed way too quick for them to make any adjustments.
Seemed almost like a microcosm of the last third of their season.
Yeah, after January, it just was pretty downhill. Even the game they won in the NCAA tournament, that was an air ball push-off tip-in, you know, in overtime to win that. So, I mean, you could even argue that play wasn't the best way to end a basketball game. It just, you know, it just seemed a lot like last year. You know, they won that first-round game, and then were just completely overmatched in the next round.
Any opinions, thoughts about why this seems to be a pattern that's developing with the Hawkeyes the last 3 or 4 years? I mean, they just don't seem to play very well the last part of their season.
I would, just guessing, I think you have to lay a lot of it on the coaching staff and how they prepare. If they're running these guys too hard, if they're psychologically speaking, they're being pushed too hard. I don't know. I'm not anywhere close enough down there to say accurate, but clearly there's a pattern now. And as you suggested, we've seen it now for a couple of years. Even when they win games late, they don't look particularly good doing it. Going forward, there's some suggestion now, I was listening to talk radio on the way back from Oklahoma City, that next year, it'll maybe take some time, there'll be a work in progress, but McCaffrey will have more of his kind of players in the program. In other words, the guys like Cassell, Woodbury didn't really fit the bill, and now the next few classes will have his guys, and maybe that'll change things. But yeah, it's, you know, the end of that first half was as ugly as you'll want to get. I mean, they turned the ball over multiple times, and Nova just went down the floor and scored at will, and it did not look good for them at all. They're just not a good effort.
I don't know if I buy into that theory that when he gets his own players, it'll be different, because they won at a high level with the players that he had this season. So there's something more at work there. I think that, and you may be right, maybe it's they're just mentally worn out by the end of the year, or whatever the case may be. But hopefully they get it right. I mean, they've got some good talented kids coming into the program. They've got some real promising kids coming back, and so we'll see what happens with them. Iowa State doesn't seem to have any problems getting mentally charged up right now, and they're on their way to the Sweet 16. 2 good wins last weekend. Not the toughest road. Iona and Arkansas Little Rock. They handled both of those teams pretty well, and they got a little tougher test this week. Friday night at 6:10 p.m. I think they play Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia is very, very good. One of the best defensive teams in college basketball. And those of us who have been around long enough to know the Bennett family and its philosophy towards basketball and defensive play know how good Tony Bennett is in that end of it. Yeah, the funny thing about Iowa State is that they were lucky. There's no question about that with the draw they got, but it wasn't their fault at all that Purdue had some issues in its game with Arkansas Little Rock. And if you remember, last year, of course, they were supposed to beat UAB and somehow didn't get that done. So This year, they seem to be very much more a team on task. They're finally playing, if not great defense, pretty good defense, more than competitive defense. Monte Morris seems to be back in stride, seems to be feeling better. And George Yang he could be one of those guys that carries a team all the way. You know, we're not there yet. He's got, as we've suggested, a very, very tough game coming up. But he's starting to look like that sort of guy. I mean, Kemba Walker was that sort of guy a few years ago, a different player, but same concept. So they have that going for him. But certainly he's going to get a very, very tough test from Virginia this weekend. And after that, well, to me at least, that seems like the regional championship game, that particular game.
It's going to be a great contrast in styles. Iowa State's offense against that Virginia defense, and you have to think Iowa State will have the 2 best players on the court on their team with Morris and Yang. It'll just be a matter of, will they be able to get the same type of buckets against Virginia that they've been able to get against other teams, and what are they going to do when Virginia's taken away their transition game, and how are they going to defensively play against Virginia?
Well, that's assuming that Virginia can take away their transition game, and Virginia can find a way to keep the ball out of Yang's hands. Nobody else has been able to do that, so, yeah, you're right, it's gonna be a great chess match, and we'll see what Virginia comes up with. Should be fun. Another basketball team that's still rolling along are the UNI Panther women. 2 wins in the WNIT at Nebraska, and then at home this weekend against Drake. Now the Panthers have a significantly tougher test, I would say, at South Dakota on Thursday night.
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting matchup. They played South Dakota actually at the beginning of the season, but South Dakota was without its best player, Nicole Seekamp. It's kind of a unique deal. She's from Australia, and I think that there was a deal where they didn't think she's going to be eligible to play this year, and then the NCAA let her play 5th season, and she had like a show cause where she had to sit out a couple games. But anyway, against Minnesota, the team that probably had the best individual player in the tournament, in Rachel Bannum, South Dakota put up 101 points, and Seekamp in that game I think had 18 points and 14 assists, so a very effective player, and that'll be a tough talent challenge for them. UNI, you have to like the way they're playing in this tournament. Good win over a good Nebraska team on the road, and then tough to play a team 3 times like Drake that had been one of the better teams in the Missouri Valley Conference. And that was really an interesting game. Drake brought up a nice crowd. UNI had a nice crowd for the short notice that you have to get ready for those WNIT games, and it had that type of rivalry feel to it. And this season, UNI's really had Drake's number, and that's a good Drake basketball team that they beat 3 times now.
Is it fair to compare Drake and South Dakota in some ways? I mean, offensively at least, I know Drake gets up and down the floor and score from all different places on the floor. UNI was able to defend that.
Oh yeah, I think they're a little bit similar to that. UNI, this was the first time that they really kept Drake's offense in check out of the 3 meetings. The previous 2, they kind of just outscored them. But in this game, they really cut away their transition buckets. And then the amazing thing was what Charnay Lamar did. She had 15 assists in the game, but the thing I've never seen is she drew, I think, 4 charges on Lizzie Wendell, who is the leading scorer in the MVC. And so she fouls out in 20 minutes of playing time. You take away their best player, it's going to be hard for them to put up points. But I'd never seen anyone draw that many charges against one kid. It was incredible.
She probably was like hiding out there.
Yeah, she's only
Charnay's
5'3".
5 foot, and Lizzie Wendell's closer to 6 foot, so by the time Charnay gets down in her defensive stance, she's only about 3 feet tall, and Lizzie probably never saw her.
No, it is incredible. I've never seen anything like that.
Nellie, let's talk a little college wrestling. I guess you'd have to say overall, it was you were out in New York City. I mean, overall, you have to look at it kind of as a disappointment for the state of Iowa.
Yeah, a little bit. You know, Iowa, I think, planned on contending for the team title, and they were right there through a couple days. And then Penn State, I mean, with their top end guys, I mean, get putting 5 into the finals, and they were 5 guys that scored a lot of points. They just wrestled better, and Iowa kind of petered out on the last day of the tournament. They went, I think, at one point on the last day, I think they went 1-9. There were in 10 matches. They might have won another match in there, but they just had a bad day, and then they lost all 3 finals, which I would say they were probably, the first one was a toss-up, second one they were not favored, and the third one they were not favored in. So I mean, it was tough for them. You know, that's the thing. We talked to Coach Brands afterwards, and they go, and we asked him pointedly, how far of a gap is it between you and Penn State? He goes, it's a long ways, but I'm not a guy that's going to give up right now. And so they're trying to figure out how to close this gap, and Penn State's going to return a lot of those guys, at least 3 of the finalists. So,
How did that gap develop?
well, typically Iowa was matching them pretty much for win, but the thing is, when Penn State guys go out, they were dominating. They scored, off the top of my head, I think it was something like 22 bonus points, which is a lot of points. That's almost having a whole nother qualifier there. So they were getting pins and technical falls and major decisions where some of Iowa wins were in overtime, or they were winning by 1, and I think the only guy that scored a lot of bonus points was Gilman, and he had 2 pins, I think a tech and a major, so he scored about 7 bonus points on himself. But Penn State, that's where they really distanced themselves, was being dominant in their wins.
I guess I'm thinking more about the gap between the programs. I mean, it's been there now for about 4 or 5
Yeah.
years, where Penn State's been the dominant team, and Iowa's been trying to catch up, and it used to be the other way around. I mean, if Penn State was even in the picture back then, I mean, when Iowa was dominant.
No, I think what the big difference is Cale Sanderson. He was a good recruiter at Iowa State. He wasn't quite getting results, but he went out there. And the number one recruiting spot in all is right probably within 100 miles of Penn State's campus, where the best high school talent is. And, you know, Cale's cleaning up those guys, and then he's going out, and, you know, Bo Nickel, who's a freshman in the finals, he's from Texas. Morgan McIntosh, who finished second at 197, is from California. And, you know, so he goes out and he cherry picks some of the best talent from around the nation, and then he's cleaning up in his hometown area, where Iowa would a lot of times. And Iowa still goes in and gets a Pennsylvania kid here now and then. But he's cleaning up the best Pennsylvania kids, and they're in his lineup. And that's the difference. He's not losing out. He's winning all the recruiting battles right now. And he's an excellent coach, too. You got to give him credit.
I guess talk a little bit too about Blaise Cobble's situation. I mean, it was really unfortunate. The guy qualifies for the national tournament and then gets a case of the mumps and is unable to go.
Yeah, it was one of those unfortunate things. I think in the week leading up to the national tournament, there was I think there was an email released to everybody that there was an outbreak of mumps, and unfortunately, Blaise came down with the mumps. And what happened is, you know, with that, you're not allowed to travel. But Iowa approached the NCAA, or UNI approached the NCAA, and it was the NCAA's final decision. Even if he had been symptom-free on Thursday morning, they weren't going to allow him to compete because he would have still been contagious, I guess. So that was it. He was done. It was tragic. You know, senior, you know, worked so hard. It was going to be his third one. He had a draw I thought was favorable to him, where he would have won 2 or 3 matches and contended to be on the podium in his senior year. I mean, he was poised to be, you know, have his best tournament. And then to have that taken away, it was really heartbreaking for the Panthers. And they could have used him. It would have even been a little bit better tournament for them to have him, because I'm pretty sure he would have won 2 or 3 matches.
Looking ahead, you expect to see a quantum leap from UNI in the next year or two?
Well, you know, they say that, and then we asked Coach that, and he goes, I'm not a next year guy, you know, but I think he's learned something this year. They had so many soft tissue injuries. And I think he's going to go out of his comfort zone and how they train and everything they go. But if you want to look at that, I think what they got coming in, the guys they've registered this year, the guys they got coming back, you know, Dylan Peters is going to be a 2-time All-American. He'll have knee surgery on his torn ACL that he All-American on this year. He basically wrestled one leg, and then made it on the podium. He'll be back next year. Josh Albert will be better for his tournament this year. So Bryce Steyer. Cooper Moore will be back, so 4 of the 5 qualifiers are back, and then you're going to plug in some guys like Max Thompson at 149, the 4-time state champ. A 2-time junior college national champion, Tyler Hoffman, will come in and contend either at 84 or 97. So you hope, that'll give them a little upgrade there. And then at heavyweight, they brought in a kid from South Dakota State. He transferred in this year. He's been with the whole program. I think he's going to step in, and he's going to be all right. I think he was a national qualifier at South Dakota State 2 years ago. So, you know, they're going to be right there. And they got some other young guys that they're excited about. Jacob Holschlag from Union, Max's teammate, and Taylor Lujan from Georgia. So, I'm talking next year, but I think they feel pretty good. And they think they're going to, it's one of those years where they can stay away from the injury bug. It's just killed them the last 2 years, that they could put a big number of qualifiers down there, more than they've had in a long time.
We're also kind of getting into spring football now. Iowa State's into their spring practices, and Iowa and UNI will be getting started if they haven't already. And Nellie, I assume you were over at UNI's Pro Day this morning. Who was there, and what did you see?
Well, it was bright and early at the Sportsplex today, so we had the Big Four that most of the scouts were there. There was probably 24 to 25 NFL scouts there, so almost every team was represented there. But the Big Four was DeAndre Hall, who was at the NFL Combine, and Mackin DeDorleant, Tim Kilfoy, and Brett McMakin were the Big Four guys they wanted to see. There was about 6 or 7 other guys that were there, including Upper Iowa's Alex Wall, and the former Panther Kevin Marine was back, went through it too. So a lot of things, D. Hall, the big thing for him is he improved his 40 time. That was his worst showing at the Combine. He took almost a tenth of a second off. I think he ran a 4.68 at the Combine, and he ran a 4.56 today. So, and then he also ran a 4.6. We were looking over guys' shoulders. They really weren't firing off these times. So they usually put it. So he ran about a 4.6. So he almost took a tenth off, and he was pretty happy about that. McIntyre really opened some eyes. He got into the 4.3s in his 40. Numerous times, anywhere from 4.33 to 4.39. And his vertical was 39 inches, so I think a lot of eyebrows were raised there. I think he really raised his stock. What does that mean? Is it going to be a late round? I know we had to wait a long time because a lot of the scouts were talking to him afterwards. And, and Tim Kilfoy, he put out 22 reps at 225. That's pretty impressive to me. That was the most of anybody there. And he ran pretty good too, mid 4.6 times as a safety. And then Brett McMakin, another linebacker came out a year early. That's the 4 that Coach Farley said he's been hearing the most about from NFL scouts. And they will get going next Wednesday as they're slated their first spring ball practice. They potentially could start on Monday a couple days earlier. Coach said to get a hold of him here. But they'll be starting full learners first day of spring is next to Wednesday. Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. I think they're going to have workouts.
How does McMakin stack up with his measurables?
Well, I think he's probably comes in only at 5'10", so he's a little short. And I know he talked about they want him to put on some weight. He needs to maybe put 10 or 15 pounds on. He only probably comes in about 180, 185. I think they probably want him at 200.
McMakin?
McMakin, yeah. Oh, McMakin. Oh, did you ask about that? Yeah, McMakin.
He's a little bigger than 5'10".
Yeah, McMakin is 6'4", 240. He ran, I think, about a 4.8 today. I'm sure that he would have wanted to run faster. He did not lift in front of me, and I didn't see his vertical either. They were bench pressing up in the upper half of the Cedar Valley Sportsplex, and down below they were doing the vertical. By the time I got down there, he had already done that. Then he did all the show. They do the 60-yard shuttle and the 3-cone drill. There were several things they did. They did the 40 in front of us all. So he looks good. He's working out. He wasn't very talkative afterwards. So he said he's been hearing from some people, and Coach Farley said he's been fielding some phone calls on him.
He reminds me a lot of Chad Greenway in the way that he plays. Maybe he's not quite as fast, but
yeah,
interesting prospect. All right, let's wrap this up with one last thing. We all talked about our NCAA tournament picks last week. I'm happy to say mine's still alive. We're down to 16, but I still think the Jayhawks are the team to beat. Where are you guys at with the tournament?
I'd rather not talk about my pick from last week. As I recall, I took the Kentucky to win it all, and they fizzled out against the Hoosiers. So where do you go from here? Since I sort of badmouthed, I think, North Carolina and Kansas, I don't know a thing about Oregon. They had a tough game. Gee whiz, why not? Why not? Let's go Iowa State. Let's roll.
All right,
all
all right.
Why not? Someone's got to pick it. Might as well be me.
It could happen.
Yep.
I'm sticking with North Carolina. I like the way they're playing, and I think they've got it figured out.
I think I had Kansas, so they're still alive, right? I've been covering wrestling.
Kansas is still alive.
Okay.
Yes, they are. All right, so be it. That's all we've got for now. As always, you can stay on top of all the local and area sports at WCFcourier.com or at our print editions. And we'll try and do this again next week.